Jeff, let's talk about Etsy. This is a company you and I both own shares of, and man, it's not been a good ride. The stock's way down. It's like down 47% this year. The business results have not been great. You could say fine, but they're definitely not great. I think the vibe you and I both have is it time to sell Etsy?
Yeah, and it's frustrating because this should have all the network effects that would result in better operating results, but it just doesn't seem to be happening. And yeah, it's becoming frustrating. So I'm happy to dive into it with you.
All right, let's take a step back and try to make an objective look at the business here. Before we do that, though, just a reminder, I'm Jason Hall. This is The Smattering. Before we get into the video, just a reminder, this video is sponsored by The Motley Fool. If you're looking for even more great stock ideas, go to our special link. Go to fool.com/smattering. The Motley Fool is going to give you its 10 best stocks to buy right now. Please check that link out after the video. All right, Jeff, first of all, what is Etsy?
It's the place to buy things that people make. So you can go to Amazon. I know it has the nickname of the everything store, but one place that Amazon falls short in comparison to Etsy is handcrafted, bespoke, whatever you want to call it, things that people make and want to sell to other people. Etsy's the only place to go to find those things. It's a two-sided marketplace. You have the sellers and you have the people who are coming there to buy the things that are being made by the sellers. It theoretically has network effects because of that, right? If that's where the buyers are, that's where the sellers are going to, if that where the sellers are, that's where the buyers are going to come to buy the things. And then that makes more sellers come on the platform and so on and so forth. But that's basically what it does. It's if you want to go buy a nice customized gift for someone, that's a place to go.
Yeah. And as a shopper, I like Etsy. I've used it. My wife is a big fan of it. And apparently most of their sellers do like it, because if there's a positive that we can point out to the business's results more recently, is that it is showing modest growth in sellers who are using the platform, right?
Yeah. So just looking at the last year, right? So the last 5 quarters, Q3 of 2022 through Q3 of 23, active sellers is picking up some momentum. So a year ago, year-over-year active seller growth was actually down 1%. Same thing in Q4 of 2022. But the last 3 quarters, year-over-year growth for active sellers was 4%, and then 12%, and then 19% in this last quarter. So that's good. You're seeing re-accelerating growth in sellers coming onto the platform. On the other hand, active buyers, people coming to buy the things, is also growing, but very slowly, literally like 1% extra growth each quarter. So you're seeing seller growth outpace buyer growth, but neither of them are numbers that are really blowing the roof off the joint. And that is really causing some of the other results that we would look for to be not as good as they could be.
Yeah, let's talk about some of those other results. The way that Etsy makes money is really simple. It takes a portion of every sale that a seller makes on its platform. And one of the things that I think is a bit of a positive is that it has been able to increase that take rate over time. You go back to 2022, and even a little bit before that, I believe it was a little bit lower than 19%, but it has been steadily increasing the take rate, and also increasing the take rate that it gets from things like advertising and marketing. Etsy does third-party marketing, and the sellers pay for that, and it gets a portion of that. So it has been able to grow that take rate. So that's one of the things that's helped it grow its revenue at a modest rate, again, 7% year over year revenue growth. And I think this is really important because they highlight their 4-year CAGR, compounded annual growth rate, of 34%. And the reality is that 4 years is important because that goes back to 2019, prior to the pandemic. And we certainly learned, they certainly acquired a substantial amount of their customer base during the pandemic. And what they're saying is that we've been able to retain the majority of those customers. You talked about that little bit of a decline that we saw for a few quarters in buyers on the platform. And now that's increased in the very, very low single digits and has increased. But I want to get back to me, the reason why I think now might be the time to sell Etsy, Jeff.
Jason, I have some reasons I'm considering selling as well. So let's hear yours and then I'll give you mine.
Okay. So I think as a starting point, the stagnation that we've seen of growth, and it's true that the company did acquire a substantial amount of, you could say they pulled a lot of customers forward during the pandemic that might not have discovered the platform when half the world's population and everybody with the internet was stuck in their house. Etsy and Amazon and Target, those were just about the only ways you could buy anything you ordered online. And Etsy was a great way to get handmade things and custom goods like you're talking about. So they acquired a tremendous amount of their customer base during that period. The thing that concerns me though, Jeff, is my expectations for this business was that it was going to be substantially larger than it is today. And yes, it's understandable that the growth rate has slowed. But again, we're talking about 1%, 2% buyer growth, customer growth. That is minuscule. If it was 7, 10, 15%, somewhere in there, honestly, that fits more in line with my expectations for this business at this, even having acquired all of those customers. Growth has completely stalled in terms of the most important metric of growth when you're a retailer, and that's the number of customers that are coming into your store or coming onto your online store. That number has completely stalled. And that is a real concern to me. It's not just a quarter, it's more than a year that we've seen this complete stalling of its growth in customers.
I agree. That is my biggest concern too, with the exception. So here's just some quick examples. With the exception of the holiday quarters, what's GMS?
Gross merchandise sales.
Yeah. Gross merchandise sales are basically flat. Little jumps in the numbers in the holiday quarter, but other than that, it's been mostly flat.
It's the one on the left here on your screen. It almost looks like somebody with 6 fingers flipping you off in the holiday quarter when revenue does naturally jump for all consumer retail businesses like that. So like you said, Jeff,
mostly for the holiday quarters. Active sellers and active buyers, the same thing, like mostly flat with these tiny little tick ups each quarter. Now I'm going to give the devil's advocate argument here, Jason. And I actually do think this is a reason not to sell. This is why I'm still on the fence. I really like, for a company like this, when they pulled so much growth forward during the pandemic, I like to look at compound annual growth rate. Because if you look at a chart that goes up and to the right and then flatlines for a while, it's very easy to think to yourself, growth has stalled. And it has. But if you connect the line from the beginning of the chart to the end of the chart, it still goes up and to the right. So what I don't know yet, what I'm struggling with, is this just them still catching up with where this, like if we saw this growth go from where it was, let's just say in March of 2018 to where it is now, but it was just a steady incline the whole way, I think our perception of this business would be very different. So what I'm wondering is, are these slow incremental increases we're seeing the last year going to accelerate over the next year or the next 2 years? If that's the case, maybe it's a reason to hold on and wait if you really have faith in the business. Maybe we see growth accelerate. It's not like you're paying an enormous premium while this growth is slowing. I just have no way of knowing that. And I can see the reason for wanting to just move on right now and not wait and see, but I could also see the argument for giving it some time.
Yeah, I'm gonna put my final thoughts in here, and I'm gonna use a visual representation of this. So you look at the earnings multiple of 26.5 times, and you say, wow, that's a business that its growth is stalled, and maybe its potential to get larger is smaller than we expected. You're like, 26 times, that's a premium price to pay. But I think there's a reasonable argument when you start looking at cash flows that maybe selling right now, it's one thing if you're giving up on the business and you don't necessarily believe in it. But I think there's also the potential, because it is a stable business, it generates positive cash flow. It's trading for less than 13 times free cash flow. And now you're actually starting to get in value territory. So it's at the point where I think if you're ready to give up on the business, that's one thing. Just in terms of thinking about valuation, there is so much pessimism, I think, that's already baked into the business. I do think selling right now probably would be short-sighted. And that's why, as much as my vibe is to sell, Jeff, I think you're right. I think now is the time to be patient and not rush to a decision. Honestly, there's probably a lot of value investors right now that are looking at Etsy and saying, you know what, 12 times cash flows, maybe I might open a position. So instead of a seller, Jeff, maybe we should think about being buyers here.